You've got to add value, and I mean it's a term that I think gets overused and watered down, but you really have to find a way to add value. If you're trying to attract an experienced partner, there's a couple of things that'll do it. Most people with experience, there's two things: deals or money. Bring them a deal or bring them money, and 9 times out of 10, that's going to get you into a general partnership. End of the day, I mean, this world moves by, with the multifamily world, you're either finding deals and bringing deals to the table, or you're finding capital and bringing capital to the table. Those are the two big drivers.
You're listening to the Guerrilla State Investing Podcast. We're not here to bruise your bananas with guru sales pitches, overrated fluff, or any other kind of monkey business. We simply provide the ground-pounding truth about what it takes to be successful in real estate.
All right, today's guest is Brian Briscoe, an active duty Marine Corps lieutenant colonel who's getting ready to retire this year. He is with Four Oaks Capital, currently have 485 units, assets under management, and they're under contract for another 144 units. Brian's also the podcast host of Diary of an Apartment Investor, and additionally, the director of the Tribe of Titans multifamily educational community. Brian got his start in single-family houses, and quickly after a mentoring session, broke through and jumped right into syndications. So, Brian, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, thanks a lot. I appreciate your time, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, man, no problem. So me and you met because I was on your podcast, and I like the way that you put your podcast together, because you introduced me organically to my first mentor, who kind of broke me into syndication. So first off, thanks for that. Appreciate it. But
not a problem.
Let's talk about you started out in single family and then quickly got into syndications. If you kind of tell us what was the change that you went through, why you got into syndication, why multifamily, and then where you're at today.
Yeah, I mean, so I've been active duty for roughly 20 years now. And, the single family houses were intentional. You buy a place when you get transferred, you live in it for a couple of years, and when you leave, you turn it into a rental. So that was our plan. I figured, hey, if I'm going to do this military thing for 20 years, and incidentally, I've moved 10 times out of the last 20. And Ramsey, I'm sure you understand that lifestyle. But, the idea was, hey, if I'm doing this for 20 years, at the end of 20 years, I should have, 8 or 10 rental houses that are cash flowing, that are appreciating, and everything else. Turns out that a lot of the duty stations I went to just, weren't quite going to work with that. I've been to a couple of places in California where you can't buy something that you'd want to live in that will actually cash flow as a rental. So, long story short, we started trying to do that. Didn't work everywhere, and we ended up with 3. And when I got to the point to where I saw the light at the end of the tunnel, military, you're eligible to retire when you hit your 20-year mark, and there's 0 retirement benefits prior to that. So right around my 16-year mark, I started looking at it, seeing that light at the end of the tunnel. I'm like, I've got one more move and I can punch, I can retire. So the real estate thing had always fascinated me. I knew I wanted to do something in real estate post Marine Corps, but didn't know what. So I started researching options, and fortunately came across multifamily. Read a couple of books on apartments, started devouring podcasts and just as much content as I could. And like you said, I got into a mentorship program, but the reason I did it was to be able to close the gap between what I'm earning now as an active duty service member and what I'm going to be earning as a retired service member, because our pensions are going to be about 30 to 40% of our active duty pay. So I just needed to bridge that gap, and syndication was the way that I decided to do it. But I like apartments for many reasons. People have to live somewhere. It's a basic human need, and the apartment market it appreciates. It's something where you can put money in and count on leverage to be able to produce really solid returns over time.
Which mentoring program did you go with, Brian?
I went with a Michael Blanc program.
How'd you like it?
We've got almost 500 units right now, so it definitely worked. I would say I had a good experience, but I think that there's a lot of people in every mentorship program who jump in and think the mentorship program is going to change them. And the truth is, the mentor is just a guide, and they're going to focus your energy, but it's still your energy that's producing results, So I would say that more than anything, it accelerated what I was going to do anyway. I think that's really how you have to look at it if you're considering mentorship is, if you're not the type of person who's going to do it anyway and work hard until you're successful, then save your money because the mentorship's not going to change that.
Yeah. Anytime I've mentored anyone in the military, in real estate, I have a little saying. I say, I'd much rather have to pump the brakes than hit the gas on somebody. And I think if you are the person who could really use a mentor, you need to be somebody who the mentor has to pump the brakes and help you steer rather than hit the gas. If you're planning on a mentor like pushing you along, it's not going to happen. You got to already have. No. But I know what you're talking about specifically with, I call it the military bread trail, where you buy a house, you move, you rent out. Now you're naturally a landlord. You buy another one. Now you're got a couple investments. But whenever you went to that mentoring program, obviously still active duty, did you have a team already built for syndications, or was that kind of the program that led you into Four Oaks Capital?
That was the program that led me into Four Oaks, really. And I mean, there's nothing magical about the mentorship program. It wasn't like, hey, pay X amount of dollars and you're going to end up on the back end with a team and a deal and everything else. I think it was just the network that, Michael Blanc attracts, so he's got a lot of people in his coaching program and a lot of people who are not in the coaching program, but are in his networks. So I met one of my partners in, Michael, for all of his coaching students and for, people in his group, has a networking group, essentially. That's all it is a networking group. And I met Eric Shirley through that group. Eric wasn't a coaching student. At the time, he called himself anti-coaching. He was kind of I don't need to pay somebody $30,000 to figure out how to do this. I can pick it up myself. But and I think the proof's in the pudding. We're both at the same level right now. I went through coaching, he didn't. But end of the day, he put in a little bit more work than I did. I probably had a little more guidance than he did, is kind of how that works. But so, yeah, I mean, I would say for anybody who's looking to do what we've done, do you need to pay, $25,000, $30,000, $35,000 for a coaching program? No. But what you need to do is get around other people who are doing what you want to do. And that's really the crux of it, is getting around those other people who are successful, learning from them, and, as you recently learned, potentially partnering with them. So that's really, I think, what it'll take.
How do people trying to tap into this? What's the best advice that you have for how do they attract a relationship with you?
You've got to add value, and I mean, it's a term that I think gets overused and watered down, but you really have to find a way to add value. So if you're trying to, attract an experienced partner, there's a couple of things that'll do it. All right, most people with experience, there's two things: deals or money. Okay, bring them a deal or bring them money, and 9 times out of 10, that's going to get you into a general partnership. So there's other couple of small things that might be able to do it. For example, if someone's trying to get multi-million-dollar loan, lenders want somebody to be part of the GP, to be a lot of people call it boots on the ground. So there is a chance that if you live in a really hot market and there's a group who has zero presence in that hot market, there's also the chance that you can be their boots on the ground. But, realistically, they probably have dozens and dozens of people to choose from as boots on the ground. you probably want to lean towards something else, where you can also bring capital or potentially help them find the deals. So really, end of the day, I mean, this world moves by, with the multifamily world, you're either finding deals and bringing deals to the table, or you're finding capital and bringing capital to the table. And those are the two big drivers.
Yeah, and I'll say that there's been quite a few people, and I'm sure with you as well, that have reached out to me and been like, "Hey, man, I want to get into real estate. Can you teach me about real estate?" And I'm like, I mean, I can, but I have a filtration process. If they have not read a book, I've got like 5 books, and I'll ask them if they've read these. And the moment I hear that no, they haven't read that book, I'll send them an e-copy of that book and tell them to get back with me in like 2 weeks. And if they don't get back with me, then I know that they weren't serious, right? But there's been a couple of people who have gotten back with me, and those people are now part of my life, deeply in part, like partners with me. There was another guy recently who approached me and wanted to get him, and he's a super young guy. He's active duty military, wanted to get into to large apartment investing and stuff. And he is now going to be the guy who screens all of our podcast, gets us on podcasts, gets other people onto our podcast, and that saves me time. So that to me is the third element: deals, money, or save me time. And if you can save me time and you get to learn along the way, then that's a good relationship. It's not just a win-lose relationship. So
I'm curious now, what book do you send everybody?
Usually it's Rich Dad, Poor Dad, because I can't even have a conversation with them if they haven't read that. But the majority of people will have read that. And then I'll ask them, like, what do you think your problem is, why you haven't got into real estate yet? And if they tell me it's because they haven't set their goals, I'll send them The One Thing by Gary Keller. If it's because they don't feel like they have enough time, I'll send them 4-Hour Work Week. So it just kind of depends on where I go from there. But it's always Rich Dad, Poor Dad right off the bat. If you haven't read that, we got to be on the same plane on how we look at money. So,
yeah. Interesting. That is the book that comes up most frequently on my podcast. I recorded 4 episodes yesterday, and that book came up 4 times, actually more than 4 times, because, most of my episodes have 2 different guests on there, but every single episode of the podcast that book comes up. So, I mean, it's one that a lot of people, who are doing what we do, it's changed a lot of lives. It made me, exactly what you said, rethink money, and it changed how I looked at money. And, now I'm in a race to accumulate assets instead of trying to, look at that promotion chart or that pay chart that, any military member has seen dozens of times. Now, instead of looking at that pay chart and saying, man, next promotion, I'm going to be making so much more money, I'm going to be so much happier. That's just not how it works.
And the word "so much more money" is a very good word to use in a government job. Well, you talked about your race to acquiring assets, right? So you mentioned that once you hit the 16-year mark in the military, that's when you kind of started to, and I'm there. I hit 16 in a couple of months, and I'm the same exact boat. Retirement's coming up. Retiring from the military looks a lot like getting another 20-year job unless you do something about it. But I know that there's a lot of people out there who are in a 20-year career job, first responder, military, teacher, whatever it may be, who are looking to not have to do that again when they retire. So how did you do a certain calculation or set a goal? I need to have this much income before I get out, and put together a plan. Like, how are you looking at that?
I looked at my current pay, and it's a certain amount. And, you've got to be familiar with how the retirement system works. We get 50% of our base pay. So, strip the housing allowance off, the BAS, all the other, lines of pay, the special pays that I get. And I looked at my basic pay amount and said, okay, I'm going to be living off of 50% of that, and I just looked at the delta. I looked at what I'm making now versus what my retirement pay is going to be, and realized that I had, a gap to fill. And so that's really what I focused on, was the gap. Can we live off of less money than I make now? Absolutely. And so I picked a number and said, this is how much I think we're going to need on a consistent basis to be able to live the same lifestyle that we're living, and so that was my focus. My focus was to bridge the gap at first. Of course, there's further goals along, but at my roughly my 17-year mark, my goal ended up being, okay, I'm going to use every available minute of my time to be able to close that gap. It's still, we're still in the process of doing that. I've made enough money in the last couple of years to create an emergency fund, and I can cover my living expenses for at least a year. So for now, it's just let's keep on moving that, kicking that can down the road. So are we consistently making that much money every year that covers the gap? Last year, yes. This year, not yet is the answer. But it's July. It's July now, so we still got time. But that's really what I was focusing on is the gap. And there's no magic number. I mean, we started out with a number. Hey, if we have this many doors and this much money coming off of each door, we'll be able to live off of that. But we're still probably a year or two away from achieving the point to where we can live off the income off the properties. Right now we're going from acquisition fee to acquisition fee. We're going from we usually keep 20 to 25% ownership in each one of the properties, and so we're looking at selling our first property later this year, which will definitely help. So that's essentially where we're at right now. It's looking at the properties that we own, the timelines the time horizons for the investment opportunities. I have a very clear path to where I want to get. So as long as properties are able to sell for what we think we can sell them for, I've got like I said, a very clear path to be able to hit those income numbers.
Yeah. And so I used to, the calculations were fairly easy whenever I first started. You know what I mean? I was like, I want to make $20,000 a year or a month in a year. I want to make $20,000 a month in passive income to be like, and I'll be retired. I don't need any more than that. Right. Yeah. And it was kind of simple. You could deal by deal. When you're doing it yourself, exactly what your numbers are looking like, and kind of by door, how many. But when you're doing syndications, the calculations are a lot more difficult because much of it is projection off market valuations. The cash flow is getting split a lot more with your partners and the investment team. So whenever you first started getting into syndications, so we're talking earlier, you said you spun your wheels for 6 to 8 months. How did you get through that? Just basically working 6 to 8 months. You have this plan for retirement. You can kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel, and you know what you need to make. What did you have to do to get that first deal done to tap into syndications?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think what you need to do is become a viable buyer is what it is, and you have to be able to portray yourself to the broker and the seller as a viable buyer. And the reason I spun my wheels was because I was not a viable buyer. There are certain things that I was just ignorant of. Like, in order to get a loan from a bank on a commercial property, you got to have net worth greater than or equal to the property value, right? Or actually the loan value. So 80% of the property value is what your net worth needs to be. I didn't have that. You have to have 6 to 12 months of liquidity, depending on which bank and which lending program. And there's a lot of other requirements that you need just to be able to get a commercial loan. And brokers and sellers all know what those requirements are. Sellers know them because they've had to get over that hurdle before, and brokers know them because they're the ones that are screening, potential buyers out of what comes through the gate. So really, I was spinning my wheels because I didn't meet the minimum requirements required of somebody to purchase an apartment complex. And it wasn't really until I met Eric Shirley when and then Eric introduced me to Brian Mallon, and he actually introduced me to the other Todd Butler as well. So he introduced me to the other partners. It wasn't until the four of us came together, we combined our balance sheet, we combined our liquidity, where we were actually viable as buyers, and that made the big difference. Was once we had a team together, the only thing we lacked between the four of us was experience, because that's the other big thing that lenders are looking for, is experience. So, the four of us came together around one deal. We knew we needed an experienced partner, and so we started shopping for somebody who would partner with us on the deal. And like I said earlier, you either bring people deals or you bring people with money. And in this case, we brought an experienced investor a deal and just said, hey, look, if you'll co-sponsor this with us, we're going to give you, X percent of the general partnership, which includes, a percentage of the acquisition fee and incomes and everything else. So, end of the day, that's really when we started getting traction, is when brokers saw not just me, but they saw us. And when they looked at us, we collectively were a viable buyer. And when it was just Brian Briscoe calling brokers, it was like, hey, man, I feel for you. Thank you for your service. But
yeah,
I mean,
that's
you're not.
No.
Yeah. I'll show you a $600,000 property, because that's what you can buy. And I was getting that more than anything else. So, yeah, that was the wheel spinning, and the only way to get traction is to, work on yourself, work on making yourself a viable buyer. And in my case, it was through partnership.
I'm glad you said that, because I get asked all the time, people, like, what comes first, the chicken or the egg, right? It's the age old question is do you buy a deal with money you don't have, or do you raise money for a deal you don't have? And my answer is relationships come first every single time, right? Mm-hmm. I learned that from Charles Seaman from your podcast, and it didn't stick with me until I realized exactly what you're saying. I think all new syndicators are going to go into this industry thinking, I'm going to be the main guy, my team, we're all going to do this, we're going to make every decision. And that may well happen if you happen to put together the team all at once, but you can't bring on an experienced investor unless that person's already got experience, and typically they're sewed into another team already. So that's exactly what we did. We didn't, once I started putting equity in relationships with other syndicators and started putting relationships in with brokers and, just being honest about what we were able to do, we really started to see the traction move, and then bam, we were ready to pounce on our first syndication. And like you said, it took us 6 to 8 months. I think 6 to 8 months is that. Once you get serious about it, I mean, really serious about it, meaning that you already have your website, you already have your professional photos, you've got your signature in your email, you've got your bio and your headshot, you're reaching out, you're posting on social media. That's all starting the car. You're not driving until you actually reach out and make that relationship. 6 to 8 months kind of seems like the time frame. It really does. Yeah. So
I would say everything that you listed are helpful items, but long term it doesn't move the needle a whole lot. You're going to get, some brokers aren't going to give you a second look if you're sending them an email from, Brian Briscoe at gmail.com.
Yeah.
They're going to look at that and they're going to be like, all right, so that stuff's important, but what it really takes to be the viable buyer is a little more than that. So, if I had to go over and do it again, we didn't have a website when we got our first property under contract. I created a domain of my own, cost $12 on Google. Incidentally, I spelled the word capital wrong on my domain, so nobody could ever email me. But I told everyone what my email address was, and, I kept on getting these, hey, my emails are bouncing back. But those are definitely helpful, and I'd recommend them. But what I'd also say is, focus on the things that move the needle too. Nice to have a business card. It's really nice to have the business card. It's really nice to have that website. And, some brokers are going to check that stuff. But, our website launched when we were probably, 3 months into our first deal. So it's nice, but yeah,
Nice, but not necessary, right?
yeah.
Yeah, I think for us, our presence, like we kind of had it in our head, like, hey, in order for us to be out there and put the word out, we need to look like it. For people to take us seriously, we need to look serious. And so, I mean, really, it's not a whole lot of like money. It is a lot of
Yeah.
work to get your business structure built out. I think this logo behind me costs $50 on Fiverr. All of
Mhm.
those things are good for people to take you seriously, especially if you haven't done anything. But at the end of the day, they're not going to take you seriously if your balance sheet or if your schedule of real estate doesn't add up for what the deal is. But it definitely at least allows you to get attract relationships for people. You don't look so much like a looky loo.
Mhm.
And I have a lot of looky loos that reach out to me. Hey man, they'll send me a deal on LoopNet. It's like,
Yeah.
I know what you're doing. I used to do it too. I used to just sit there and look on LoopNet until something reasonable came around. But have you called the broker? Have you actually established a relationship? Are you talking to the bank? Are you just sending me this deal because you think it's interesting, or are you interested in it? Like, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
there's different levels of seriousness to it. I do believe. But anyways,
Yeah.
well, that'll lead me into the next question, Brian, which I ask everybody, and you may have just answered it, but what really bruises your bananas in real estate? And what I mean by that is what's the
Mhm.
biggest lie told into real estate right now, and how can you help clear that up?
Oh, geez. There's a lot of lies. One of them that kind of frustrates me is the preferred returns. Everybody does this, but if you're doing a heavy value add, you're not going to pay preferred. I mean, you're not going to hit your preferred returns. And that's just what it is. And there's a lot of operators who will say that they're doing preferred returns. So they say, hey, we're going to pay out an 8% preferred return, and they raise several $1,000,000. But one thing a lot of them do is they overraise, and the return that they're paying out is money that they've overraised. So that's one of those things that you got to look at. If you're doing a heavy value add, there's not going to be cash flow year one, or not a whole lot of cash flow year one. There's not going to be a whole lot of cash flow even year two, because the operator is spending a lot of time churning the tenant base over. Usually if you're buying a value add property and you're making it better, there's a certain percentage of the tenant base that you're going to end up basically refreshing, for lack of a better term. And your occupancy is going to be lower, your expenses are going to be higher. You're not going to be getting the pro forma rents for 1 to 2 years in the entire complex. So there's not money coming in to pay that pref. So if you're a passive investor looking at deals, and somebody's got this great value add property that's going to pay an 8 or a 10 pref, you might want to double check their numbers, because more than likely what they're doing is they're giving your own money back, calling it a preferred return, and then hoping that everything works out when they sell at the end. I think that's one of the bigger lies that I've seen, and trying to compete against that is difficult. We do value adds where we're consistently putting $10,000 to $20,000 a door into each one of the properties. And because of that reason, we just don't offer prefs, because we know in year one we're not going to pay it. And we know that in year two, we might hit our prefs, and we don't want to be, behind on payments starting out. And we know that if we're doing heavy value adds, we're not going to hit those numbers year one, usually until about second year.
Is there a way to structure a deal to where your pref doesn't start until construction's complete?
There is. It just depends on there's as many ways to structure deals as you can get creative. But for example, I invested passively in a development that's given me a preferred return, and in that particular development, the pref starts accruing, day one, but it's not until it's developed and sold they'll actually get that money back. So it's one of those things where if you're looking at the preferred return and you're thinking, I'm going to be getting that as cash flow. If it's a heavy value add, you're not going to be getting that as cash flow. And if you are, like I said, it's your own money coming back to you. But I have seen deals where prefs start at, year 1 or year 2. It really depends on how the operator wants to set it up and, what their investors are looking for. But, come to think of it, it's a good idea to do something like that if you're doing a heavy value add where, hey, year 1, year 2, you're going to get, investors are going to get 75% of the cash flow. It's a straight split. And then starting year 3, once our value add's complete, we're going to start paying a 6 or an 8 pref. And I think that's a fair way to structure it.
Awesome, Brian. I appreciate that answer, man. So how can our listeners get a hold to you? Where can they find out more information about you?
So easiest place, we've got a couple of websites, 4oakscapital.com it's more oriented towards the people who want to invest. TheTribeOfTitans.info is another one that's aimed at our multifamily educational community. We're trying to create the type of community that brought Four Oaks together, centered around education, but we're really looking for that community. So TheTribeOfTitans.info, and then podcast, Diary of an Apartment Investor. And we also have a podcast website, diaryofanApartmentinvestor.com. So those are the easiest ways. And I guess I'll give my email out to Brian Briscoe at 4oakscapital.com.
Absolutely, Brian. I actually really enjoy your podcast. There's specific episode was this guy, Ramsey Blankenship, comes on as a newbie. That's probably the best one in your arsenal. I'd have to go and plug that one.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell you what, we cycle one back to the front. We have a throwback Thursday every week, and we bring one from the archives back up. When this podcast episode airs, I'll cycle that back up, and it'll be my throwback Thursday for the week. So, let me know when this is going to air, and people can hit my podcast up, and your episode will be right up at the top.
Sounds good, Brian. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show, brother, and come back anytime.
Absolutely, and I got to have you back on my podcast. We started the first deal episodes, and you're in now. So
let's do it. All right, man. Thanks.
Let's do it.
Thanks for listening to the Gorilla State Investing Podcast, where we give you the ground-pounding truth about what it takes to be successful in real estate. Learn more at realfocus.org/Gorilla State Pod.